The house was silent, wrapped in the stillness of another sleepless night. A soft night light cast a gentle glow over the nursery where 6-month-old Ethan Parker lay motionless in his crib. His tiny body, once full of energy, had grown still over the past few months. A mysterious condition had robbed him of movement, leaving his parents, Emma and James, heartbroken and exhausted. Doctors had no answers. Every test, every scan, nothing could explain why Ethan couldn't move. Emma and James had spent months searching for a cure, clinging to hope that seemed to slip further from their grasp with each passing day. But there was one member of the family who refused to give up: Milo, a retired search and rescue canine. Ever since Ethan's condition began, Milo had stayed by his crib every night, standing watch with unwavering loyalty. He seemed to sense something no one else could. That night, as the clock ticked past midnight, Milo began acting strangely. He whined, paced the room, then let out a sharp bark, his eyes locked onto Ethan. Something was happening, something that would change their lives forever. Milo had always been more than just a pet. As a retired search and rescue canine, he had spent years saving lives, tracking lost hikers through forests and pulling survivors from disaster zones. Though his days of active duty were behind him, his instincts had never faded. And now, those instincts were telling him something was wrong. From the moment Ethan fell ill, Milo had barely left his side. He would sit beside the crib, his ears twitching at every small sound, his eyes filled with quiet determination. At night, while Emma and James lay awake in their bedroom, wondering if their son would ever recover, Milo kept his silent vigil. Emma often found comfort in watching the dog interact with Ethan. Even though Ethan remained motionless, Milo would nuzzle him gently, as if urging him to fight. James, too, had noticed the connection between them. "It's like he's trying to tell us something," he had once whispered to Emma. But what could a dog possibly know? That night, however, would prove that Milo understood far more than they had ever imagined. As the hours passed and the house remained still, the faithful dog grew restless. His body tensed, his ears perked up, and his breathing became heavier. Then, out of nowhere, he let out a sharp, urgent bark, a sound that sent chills down Emma's spine. Milo jumped up on his paws, pacing anxiously. He whined, barked again, then ran toward the door, looking back at Emma and James as if pleading with them to follow. Something was happening, something that couldn't wait. When Emma rushed to the crib to check on Ethan, her heart stopped. Ethan's tiny fingers twitched, ever so slightly, like a faint whisper of life returning. She froze. Was it real? Was she imagining it? Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Then, before she could process what was happening, Ethan's hand moved again, this time with more intention. "James!" she gasped, her voice shaking. "Come here. Look at this." James rushed into the room, his heart pounding. The moment his eyes landed on Ethan, his jaw fell open. The baby's tiny fingers curled slightly, then straightened. It was the first movement they had seen in months. Milo, standing beside them, let out a low whimper, his tail wagging slightly. He nudged Ethan gently with his nose, as if encouraging him. And then, in the most incredible moment of all, Ethan's entire arm twitched. Tears welled up in Emma's eyes. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He's moving." James knelt beside the crib, his hands shaking as he reached for his son. "Ethan, buddy, can you hear me?" His voice cracked with emotion. And then, as if responding to his father's voice, Ethan's little legs kicked, weakly at first, then stronger. Emma let out a sob, covering her mouth in disbelief. "This can't be real," she murmured. But it was real. It was happening right in front of their eyes. Milo wagged his tail wildly, his excitement almost palpable. He barked once, then nuzzled Ethan again, his warm presence like a source of strength. James turned to Emma, his voice full of shock. "The doctor said he might never move again. How is this possible?" Emma couldn't answer. All she knew was that their son, who had been trapped in stillness for so long, was coming back to life. And somehow, Milo had known it would happen. Emma and James could barely breathe as they watched, stunned, while Ethan's tiny limbs continued to move, small, uncertain motions, but movements nonetheless. After months of heartbreaking stillness, it was as if his body was finally waking up. Milo remained at the crib's edge, his eyes locked onto Ethan. Every time the baby moved, he responded, a soft bark, a gentle nuzzle, an encouraging wag of his tail. It was almost as if he was coaxing Ethan forward, urging him to keep going. James wiped at his eyes, his voice shaking. Emma, this doesn't make sense. Just yesterday, he couldn't even lift a finger. Emma let out a soft, breathless laugh, tears streaming down her face. I don't care if it makes sense. He's moving. That's all that matters. She reached into the crib and gently took Ethan's hand. His fingers curled slightly around hers, a weak but deliberate grasp. The warmth of his tiny fingers sent a shiver through her spine. Milo, she whispered, turning to look at their loyal dog. Did you know this would happen? Milo tilted his head slightly, then gave Ethan a soft lick on the cheek before looking back at Emma with intelligent, knowing eyes. James exhaled sharply and grabbed his phone. I'm calling the hospital. We need to take him in now. Within minutes, they were in the car, speeding toward the nearest emergency room. Emma sat in the back seat, holding Ethan close, while Milo sat beside her, his body pressed protectively against the child. Every so often, Ethan's tiny fingers twitched, his legs giving little kicks. They weren't strong yet, but they were there, and that was more than Emma and James had dared to hope for. As they approached the hospital, Emma stole a glance at Milo and whispered, You did this, didn't you? Milo didn't move. He simply sat tall, watching over Ethan like a guardian angel with 4 legs and a heart full of love. The emergency room was quiet when Emma and James rushed in, Ethan wrapped securely in his mother's arms. Milo trotted alongside them, his ears perked, his steps steady and deliberate. It was as if he knew this moment was crucial. A nurse looked up from the front desk, startled by their urgency. What's wrong with your son? She asked immediately, motioning for a doctor. Emma, still breathless from the rush, struggled to find the words. He started moving, she finally choked out. After 6 months of nothing, he's moving. The doctor on call, Dr. Reynolds, approached with a furrowed brow. Wait, you mean Ethan Parker? The baby with the unexplained paralysis. James nodded rapidly. Yes, he hasn't moved in months, but tonight, it just started happening. Dr. Reynolds exchanged a glance with the nurse before quickly leading them to an examination room. Milo attempted to follow, but a staff member gently held him back. He let out a soft whine, his eyes never leaving Ethan. Inside the room, the doctor ran a series of initial tests, his expression unreadable. He checked Ethan's reflexes, muscle tone, and responsiveness. Every so often, he paused, glancing at Emma and James with growing disbelief. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he exhaled deeply. He shook his head, this shouldn't be possible. Emma's heart pounded. But it is, isn't it? Dr. Reynolds nodded slowly, watching as Ethan curled his tiny fingers into a fist, a movement that had once seemed like an impossible dream. I don't have an explanation for this, the doctor admitted. Medically, nothing should have changed. He looked at them carefully, but something did, and just outside the door, Milo sat patiently, his tail thumping softly against the floor, as if he already knew the answer. Dr. Reynolds ordered a full set of tests, scans, blood work, and neurological evaluations. Every single result came back the same as before. There were no changes in Ethan's brain scans, no signs of nerve regeneration, no medical explanation for why his body had suddenly begun moving again. The doctors were baffled. One specialist, Dr. Patel, reviewed Ethan's case file carefully. There's no precedent for this, she murmured. No treatment, no surgery, no intervention. Yet somehow, his motor functions are returning. She turned to Emma and James. Has anything changed at home? Emma exchanged a glance with James before looking toward the door, where Milo sat watching intently, his ears perked as if he understood every word. James hesitated before answering. Our dog, Milo. He's been by Ethan's side since this all started. And last night, he acted like he knew something was about to happen. He barked, he ran to us, he made sure we saw it. Dr. Patel raised an eyebrow. A dog. Emma nodded firmly. Not just any dog. Milo is a retired search and rescue canine. He's trained to sense things, danger, distress, and maybe something we don't even understand. The doctors fell silent, exchanging skeptical yet intrigued glances. I've seen therapy dogs help patients recover, Dr. Reynolds finally said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. But this goes beyond anything I've ever heard of. He turned back to Ethan, watching as the baby wiggled his fingers again, slow but deliberate. Whatever the reason, whether science can explain it or not, one thing is undeniable. Ethan is getting better. And somehow, Milo had known before anyone else. The next few days at the hospital felt like a dream. Ethan's movements, once so faint and uncertain, became stronger with each passing hour. First his fingers, then his hands, then, to everyone's amazement, his legs kicked for the very first time. Emma and James spent every waking moment by his side, watching as their son slowly regained control of his tiny body. The doctors continued their tests, trying to make sense of it all, but no scans, no lab results, no medical theories could explain what was happening. But Milo didn't need an explanation. Every day, the loyal German shepherd waited outside Ethan's hospital room, his ears perking up at every sound. Whenever they let him in, he rushed straight to Ethan's bedside, tail wagging, eyes filled with quiet encouragement. And something incredible happened each time. Ethan responded. One morning, as Milo gently nuzzled his nose against Ethan's tiny fingers, Ethan did something he had never done before. He reached out. Emma gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. James stood frozen, unable to believe what he was seeing. Ethan's tiny fingers brushed against Milo's fur, weak but unmistakably real. Milo let out a low, happy whine, as if to say, "That's it. Keep going." Tears streamed down Emma's face as she whispered, "You're bringing him back to us, aren't you?" Milo simply sat beside Ethan's crib, standing guard like he always had. He didn't need words. His actions spoke louder than anything science could explain. Ethan's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. And deep down, Emma and James knew the truth. It wasn't just medicine. It was love. And love, especially the kind that came with four paws and an unbreakable bond, could change everything. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories. Tell us in the comments, do you believe in the power of love and loyalty? Let's celebrate the incredible bond between humans and their furry best friends. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.